Francis is spending his first full day in Mexico. It is an historic trip to a country that's home to around 100 million Catholics. Hello, I'm Lynda Kinkade. Welcome to CNN Newsroom. Thanks for joining us. Right now, the leader of the Roman Catholic Church is in Mexico City. His first stop there as Pope. It's Saturday morning and there are huge crowds that have been gathered throughout the city to catch a glimpse of Pope Francis. Right now he is at the National Palace with the President and First Lady for a welcoming ceremony. And we're joined now by Rosa Flores, who's in Mexico City covering the Pope's visit. Rosa, the Pope is due to give a speech shortly. What sort of issues is he expected to touch on?
You know, first and foremost, for Pope Francis, this is a pastoral visit. So any speech, any homily that he delivers, he usually expresses mercy. He says that he is there for the people. He wants to be with the people of Mexico. Now, some of the controversial and tough issues that he will be speaking about here in Mexico are some of the ills of Mexico. So, for example, corruption, drug violence, immigration. He's expected to deliver a homily at the border when he delivers and celebrates Mass there. So there are going to be some tough topics. But Lynda, you and I know that he does not shy away from these difficult issues. He already has, you know, several famous sayings like, "Who am I to judge?" So he usually embraces the fact that there are difficult issues in our society, but he uses his mercy to deal with that and help people deal with anything that they're going through. In the case of Mexico, some of those ills, corruption, drug violence, and immigration, the migration of people to and from countries.
And we are just looking at some live pictures of where the Pope will give that address in the presidential palace. And we will bring that to you live when it happens. Rosa, of course, the Pope is meant to work his way up from the south of Mexico to the north. You mentioned that immigration is going to be a big issue for him, particularly in this city and on that border between Mexico and the U.S.
You know, it is. When he spoke before the U.S. Congress, in a very nice way, he looked at everybody at Congress and said, you know, we are all immigrants. We're all immigrants. And so that was a huge moment, because if you missed it, it was very quick, but if you missed it, you didn't realize that literally what he was telling people in the United States was that people in the U.S. are immigrants. So now that he's here in Mexico, which he wanted to enter the United States through Mexico, because he said he wanted to enter like an immigrant, but he didn't have enough time to do that because that was a very long trip. So now he's getting the opportunity to do that. And like you mentioned, he is going from the southern border of Mexico, and that's where tens of thousands of immigrants from Central America and other countries enter Mexico on their way to the United States. Now, there are various routes that immigrants take to get to the border, and those are dangerous routes. Pope Francis will be stopping at some of the locations, for example, in Chiapas, in that southern state, where some people perish trying to get to the United States. Then Pope Francis moves on to the border. We know that many people die trying to get to the U.S., and that is where he's going to celebrate Holy Mass. And he's expected to deliver his homily there. We're expecting very powerful words from the pontiff. And then after that, Lynda, one of probably the biggest symbols of this trip is Pope Francis heading over to the dividing line, the wall, the fence that divides the U.S. and Mexico in that part of the country. He's expected to pray in silence, perhaps drop some flowers, leave some flowers there, and pray for those who have perished trying to get to the U.S. Now here's the other thing that's going to be happening. Thousands of people are going to be watching both in Mexico and the United States. He's going to be speaking about unity. So very powerful images and probably very powerful words as well.
And you, of course, Rose, were very fortunate to travel again with the Pope on the plane. He did share a bit of a secret with you. What can you tell us?
You know, Pope Francis told me a little secret. He said, he's actually said it very low, but everybody on the plane found out that he's working on a children's book. So he collected letters from children around the world. He's compiling this book. He's reading the letters, reflecting and answering the letters of children. You and I know that children have no filters, so I can only imagine what some of those questions are, but he's crafting these answers for children. And we know that he's always been very close to children. They're very close to his heart. Whenever he's around children, he lights up, and children love him as well. I can tell you because I went to a school in Chicago where I collected letters that children wrote to Pope Francis, and I cannot explain to you with what joy some of these children from St. Mary Star of the Sea Church in Chicago told me. These little kids would light up saying that they just love the Pope, that they respect him. You know, some of the questions, Lynda, that they asked me that they wanted to ask the Pope was, why does he go to a lot of other countries? Why does he speak so many languages? Why did he want to be Pope? You know, and what would he do if he actually met Jesus? So there are all of these questions that, you know, they're amusing in one sense, but it means also so much for these children who look up to him and who have a lot of faith.
Hopefully some of those questions and his answers make it into his book. It sounds like it's going to be an incredible thing to read. Just give us a sense of the atmosphere there. Obviously, we saw some incredible pictures of...
For all ages.
Yes. Oh, yeah, we might learn a thing or two. Just give us a sense of the atmosphere there.
You know, there is a lot of energy and love, Mexican style, I would say. So let me just kind of take you through his arrival. When Pope Francis got out of the papal plane and started walking towards the crowd, you could hear people chanting. They were chanting his name. They were asking for his blessing. And I was right there, right in front of all of the crowds of people. And there was just this enormous energy and happiness. And of course, it was probably difficult for Pope Francis to hear because he was a bit far away on the red carpet with the President and the First Lady. But the people who were sitting behind me, they kept on asking for his blessing. So lo and behold, Pope Francis probably hears this as he's walking away on the red carpet, and in very much Pope Francis fashion, he leaves the red carpet and he starts going to where the people are. They want a blessing, Pope Francis is going to give him a blessing. So he walked around. There was almost like a moon shape of bleachers, and he walked around and gave everybody his blessing, and people just loved it. People just loved it. I was very close to the Pope, actually, in one of those areas where they had the Vatican press, and I could hear and could read his lips because I captivated on video, and it's on my Vine, by the way. But you can see Pope Francis glowing and saying gracias, gracias. You could just feel that he was just almost like enveloped in this amazing warmth in Mexico, and that's what we're going to be seeing on the streets. We're expecting a lot of people to be out by the tens of thousands lining the streets or in the events, waiting to hear what he has to say.
He sounds very elated to be there. We are just looking at some live pictures of the Pope in the presidential palace. It's seemingly getting a tour by the President and the First Lady. These are obviously, it's going to be quite a contrast, these sort of regal pictures in the palace compared to some of the areas he will visit where some of the poorest in Mexico live.
Absolutely, and you can see this throughout the papal trips that we cover. Usually when he's with politicians and, you know, important people, if you will, within a community, you know, he's very cordial and formal. But when you see him with the people, you see Pope Francis as Pope Francis. You see him smile, he's glowing, he's kissing babies, he's embracing people in wheelchairs. He has people brought to him if they have possible access to get to him, or he'll just walk over, you know, leave the Pope Mobile and make sure that he can have that embrace. Now, one other thing that I haven't mentioned but is very important too is one of the states that he's visiting, Chiapas, Chiapas is very much an indigenous community. Only about 75% of the people in that area are Catholic. Now that's low for Mexico, and the last time that he was around a community that was indigenous and the majority of the people there indigenous, the mass was the hymns of the mass were in multiple tongues and native tongues as a way to embrace and unify the church with the culture there. Now, the other thing that he said is and this was in Bolivia, he apologized for the ills of the church towards the indigenous. So that was a very powerful moment in Bolivia. So I'm wondering if he is going to say anything of that sort here in Mexico, because in Chiapas, the majority of the people are indigenous, and we know that he's very conscious of history, and he knows his history. He's the first Latin American pope, and he knows a history of Latin America and what that means. And so I'm very curious, Lynda, as to what he's going to say, because again, his homilies are usually laced with mercy and try to cure some of the ill and some of the pain, not only in present day, like the issues that we were talking about, but also the issues of the past.
And he also will be meeting with some people in prisons and also heading to areas that have been at the center of the drug wars. What sort of message will he be hoping to spread when he meets with those sort of people?
You know, I'm very curious as to what he's going to say, because back in 2013, when he went to Brazil, he called out narcos, calling them dealers of death. So very powerful words there. So here in Mexico, we of course know that the most notorious drug dealer is El Chapo. Everyone's very curious. Is he going to say something? Will he say his name? If you ask me, my guesstimate would be no, he would probably not do that, because he never points fingers at anybody. But will he have a message? I would say so. I would say that that's safe to say, only because he doesn't shy away from tough topics, and he doesn't shy away from things that might appear to be controversial. I can tell you on the papal plane from Cuba to Mexico, he came to the back of the plane where all of the journalists sit, and he gave some brief remarks about the document that he signed with the Patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church. But if you extrapolate from that, he said, I want you to remember this. And he told all the journalists on the plane, said, I want you to remember this, that a lot of the topics that we talk about seem political, seem social, but remember that every message is pastoral when it comes to the church making that message. So when the Pope speaks about the message, it's pastoral. And so that's really important to keep in mind. So while we can read it as political, while we can read it in social terms, for him, is what he told journalists is, for him, it's pastoral. So it's going to be interesting to see what he says, but we're expecting him to say some powerful words for sure.
He certainly is receiving a standing ovation right now before that speech takes place. And later today he will be holding a mass at the Basilica of the Virgin of Guadalupe. What does that patron saint mean to the people of Mexico?
Our Lady of Guadalupe is the mother of all Mexicans. I'll have a confession to make. I'm Mexican. So I can tell you firsthand that from the moment you are born, you learn that Our Lady of Guadalupe is your mother, and that she's going to be with you everywhere that you go, whether you're in a situation that's difficult, painful, whether you feel isolated or not. She's a symbol of the mother that you carry in your heart everywhere you go. And so, you know, for example, Pope Francis on the papal plane mentioned the following. He said, you know, Mexican atheists believe in Our Lady of Guadalupe, in the Blessed Mother, in the Mother of God. He said that's how powerful she is in Mexico. And so that just kind of gives you a little glimpse of the devotion for the Blessed Mother in Mexico, Lynda.
Absolutely incredible. Rosa Flores, just stand by for a moment. The President of Mexico is speaking now. Let's listen in.
who is leading a millenary institution and bringing it closer to newer generations. We recognize a reforming Pope who is bringing the Catholic Church to an encounter with people. I entrust myself to the gaze of Mary, the Blessed Virgin of Guadalupe, so that by her intercession, the merciful Father may grant that these days and the future of this land be an opportunity for encounter, unity, and peace. Thank you very much.
You're just listening to Pope Francis addressing the people of Mexico in Mexico City at the presidential palace. Let's bring in our CNN's Rosa Flores, who's covering the Pope's visit live in Mexico City. Rosa, the Pope started off by saying that he comes as a missionary of peace, but also as a son of the Virgin of Guadalupe, of the patron saint of Mexico, asking for her blessing and trying to speak to the youth of Mexico, which make up half the population.
You know, it was difficult for me to hear your question, Linda, but I think you're asking about what he was addressing involving corruption and also some of the ills in Mexico. I can tell you that the people of Mexico live that every day. They live the corruption. They live the violence. And one of the things that Pope Francis mentioned before arriving in Mexico was that he knows that a visit from the Pope, from the leader of the Catholic Church, is not going to solve all the ills in one visit, but he wanted to experience life in Mexico with them, to be one with the people. One of the things that stood out to me from what he was saying was when he says that let's build a civilization of love. He said, and it kind of almost saying, let's take personal responsibility for what has happened and what is happening, but let's build a civilization of love. And so that's pretty much his message. He wants to make sure that everyone can experience the mercy of God, like he mentioned in his speech and in his remarks. But he also didn't shy away from speaking about corruption and about violence and drug violence. And like you and I had talked about earlier, we knew that he was going to mention something. And then finally, he also mentioned that to the president that the Catholic Church is here to help you in that mission to make Mexico a better Mexico.
And it was something that was reiterated by the president when he addressed the people there at the presidential palace. He was speaking about so much wealth has never been produced, but it's concentrated in very few hands. And never have we been at a point where that wealth can be shared better and people can be fed. There shouldn't be a reason that people are starving. And it's very much to the Pope's message of trying to bring justice and charity to the country.
That's very much in line with the Pope's message. The Pope wants to be one with the poor. He wants the ills of the poor to be the ills of everybody, not in isolation of the poor. He wants the wealth to be shared. You know, he wants to make sure that we all feel the responsibility to make not only Mexico, but quite frankly, he has a global message, but every country in the world to feel the responsibility of what's happening around the world. The same with his message on the encyclical about how the earth is hurting and how each individual person needs to think about themselves not as an individualist, but as one in a global society. And you know, he's mentioned multiple times that if we think that way, the earth would be a better place.
Absolutely. He also made a point of trying to speak to the youth of Mexico. He said that half the population in Mexico is made up of youth, of young people, and he said they are the hope for the future. How is he going to connect with those young people as he travels throughout the country?
You know, Pope Francis has a very genuine way to connect with the youth. He usually riles them up. In Brazil, he said, "Hagan un lío, let's make a ruckus. You know, let's make sure that we are out in the streets." And of course, that's very familiar with you know, the young attitude of living life, and that's what he wants, to make sure that the faith also continues for this youth, that he has you know, the right words for them so that they can be encouraged. Now, you know, he mentioned the fact that half of the population in Mexico is youth. Half of the population in Mexico is also poor, and so all of these different issues kind of layer up as you talk about them, and as a whole, there's a lot of issues that Pope Francis will be dealing with as he goes through all of these states and cities in Mexico, because that's what he wants. He wants to be with the people. He wants to be with the poor. He's going to be visiting a prison. He's also said that it's painful for him to visit prisons because of what they represent, because of the pain that's there. But he also says that it's important to face that pain. And so, you know, as he goes along through this voyage through Mexico, we're going to see how he connects with all of these different groups who need a little mercy, who need a little listening to, who need a little love. And I'm sure that we're gonna be following it so that everyone around the world can see that happen here in Mexico.
Well, as the president said, millions of Mexicans are ready to receive the Pope's words of mercy and charity and hope. Rosa Flores in Mexico City, it's really great to have you with us. Thank you very much. We will talk to you soon.
You're welcome.